Hi, I'm Professor here. The unprofessor, I mean, not I'm Professor, I don't mean that, I mean I'm the unprofessor. So, once again, I'm hungry. I have dinner waiting, and I'm about to enjoy the view before I go in, if you get my meaning. That's the rest of whatever the sunset was. It was a beautiful day here in what's normally the wet coast. Anyway, so I was just had on MSNBC for something different from what else I've been having on, which is a lot of my own stuff while I've been editing it, and a lot of stuff on obscurities, Hold North and stuff, and thinking about, so what I've been had some exchanges about the British Columbia referendum where people are saying, oh, it was a fair process, everybody had a chance for input. No, 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 no. The same people who didn't have a chance to vote at Services BC were also not able to take part in the process of what should be the shape of electoral reform. What should it be its shape? And what came out of it was a confusing ballot anyway, with something on it that nobody understood, with complicated math, a dual member system, and not the system that we'd already had, arrived at by Citizens Assembly and had a stacked deck laid against us, that 60% bar, in other words, a 40% veto. Anyway, be that as it may, British Columbia politics is the asinine game that it's always been. But I was just listening to the North Carolina situation where there's Mark Harris, I think is the guy. There's been some election irregularities. Remember how robocalls and all that, and the In-N-Out scandal and all that stuff with the Harper election, then they still allowed this, although that election still was not overruled, even though it was only tweaked by a few dozen thousand votes, come on. But down in the States, no, they've got this system where, because the Republicans have been pulling the game of stripping Democratic governors of their power before they take office, using their power in the state legislature. So they tried to do this there, and it backfired somehow. And so now what's going to happen is that Congress is going to refuse to seat this guy from North Carolina, Mark Harris, because his election was corrupted. But they're saying it's not just his seat, it's the whole general election was corrupted. Okay, so how do we proceed from here then? Congress takes that together, they deliberate that for a while, they argue for a while. Do they have enough seats in the Senate? No. But there's 131, I can't remember what it is in the Senate, but there's a whole bunch of seats coming up too. Right? They're not always on 2020. I think there's some coming out this year. So anything can change in Washington. But the point about British Columbia is here we have the similar situation where you have a certain gentleman, Mr. Wilkinson, who is the leader of the Liberal Party, who a few days before the results came said that he would not honor the results. Well, I agree with him. They should not be honored because they didn't take in not just only 42% eventually of the voters list. To let that sink in. The voters list is not the list of citizens. The vote was unconstitutional. I've been saying it for 5 weeks. And we have the clear demonstration of it now, that all the ridings that voted heavily were white, wealthy, and older. And ridings where there were young people and minorities, whether young people were in school or working or both. Guys banging nails on rooftops. I know of a bunch of guys working, doing that and stuff like that. And working graveyards. Good buddy of mine, he works in Walmart night shifts because he has 2 little kids. You think him and his wife have time to think about going to Services BC or calling to vote? Or even knowing about there's a meeting that's going to affect their children's future that they haven't been told? This is British Columbia for you, right? I can't say we can become France overnight, but we need to become a lot more enlightened than we think we are. You see it every day. I see it every day. People walking by people who should be given, they're having a hard time in life and everybody treats them like shit. And so they feel like shit and they behave like shit and they get into shit. Young buddy's in that boat right now. He'll get through. I hope he gets through. But the people in fancy cars who drive around going, oh, let them go to Services BC, they don't get it. They don't get the point about voter inclusion, and they don't really care about voter exclusion. And that was said to me more or less directly, although she didn't mean it in those terms, by this one woman. I won't repeat her name. It was on a certain Fair Vote Canada BC group today about, well, they had it was a fair process. That don't anybody who's not saying this is just another debunker of the referendum. No, 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 no. What we need is full-time referendums. We need recall. Okay, so in France, the 1% is 700,000 of this. I think that's the thing, is it's 1% of the vote of the electorate can initiate a referendum that everybody will debate on. Well, a couple of times a year there'll be big referenda, like there is in American states, right? That like there is in Switzerland. Switzerland is built on that. There's no reason we can't reform British Columbia, except we're stuck with this obsolete idea of the crown. And the crown is really just a legal tool that doesn't even have title on the mainland, most of the mainland. Northeast they do, but nowhere else other than the treaty they've signed in the Nass and Tsawwassen and Seychelles. That's about it. Soyuz maybe, I'm not sure down there. But there is no crown sovereignty here. So here we have this farce of a mass of people in the southwest of the province voting on the fate of projects in the northwest where nobody voted. It's the lowest returns in the province. It was at least 3 weeks into the returns. It probably still is. And why? Why? Because that area of the province wasn't given a choice in joining Canada by the massive voters in the lower mainland on the island who voted to join Canada. And that's the supposed legal basis, that vote to join Canada, is why BC has, ever since the government of BC has maintained that it's now all Ottawa's problem. Well, that hasn't worked out really well, has it? So the political geography of BC is part of the problem, and also the ignorance of British Columbians about the real politic of what the parliamentary democracy system is and what it's not. So I challenge Mr. Wilkinson, who'll never see this and wouldn't care if he did, because I'm nobody to him, and that's the whole point. Because people bearing truth, they can cut you down just based on the fact that you look poor and have missing teeth. Yeah, well, why would that be? So I'm not going to go on about all my problems, but what I will say is that if Mr. Wilkinson is serious about this vote not being legitimate because not enough people voted on it, I challenge him to live up to that and to call for a new vote to bring down the government. If you can win that seat in the 901, I don't think they can. To bring down the government so that there can be a new election, and then we'll see what people have to say about whether or not the Greens should have seats or not. Because that's the whole basis of this whole vote. No, not a new election. What am I saying? A new referendum. A new referendum where every single citizen gets to vote and has a chance to vote and to be fully informed as to what's at stake. And what's at stake is the future of their children and whether or not they can govern this province for themselves, or whether governments run by parties that can easily be bought by outside powers, and I don't mean just companies, I mean international unions also, or green organizations, I don't know. But that the people of BC should be voting for what BC gets. This is what the French want. The French want referendum control over public policy and public process, recall, and ongoing evolution of the Constitution. That the fixed Constitution here has been laid in stone by the First Ministers as a tool to build autocracy and maintain it. They have staged and screwed the referendum process here, and now they maintain that the people of British Columbia don't want it. Well, I'll tell you what, the people of British Columbia were never offered it. And it never had to be done by referendum. The Liberals and Conservatives did it by legislation when they brought in the elimination ballot in 1951, and W.A.C. Bennett used an order in council to return things to a FPTP for the 1956 election. So all this farce of a referendum is just a BS game. So, anyway, yeah, I'm the angry professor now. The young professor has turned into the angry professor. But I'm not angry. I'm just observing that how different it is from the States, where people are much more politically conscious, and even the big networks have people like MSNBC is still NBC. It's still a big network. It's still corporate. And they only cover this issue. I never see anything on MSNBC about France or Japan or anywhere else, China only if it has to do something to do with Trump. American networks are useless, and Canadian networks really are no better. Now, is there a Jack Webster out there? I don't know. Maybe that's me. Maybe I have to fall into that category, but I don't want to work for any network. God, no. What's a network? Who owns the network? Who else is in the network? See? You have to really think about all that stuff. Thomas Pynchon. Part of my political education was Thomas Pynchon. All right. So anybody who hasn't reading that, Haldor Loxness, also there's other authors I can name that you learn about the way politics works from certain authors. Anyways, so we have this situation down in the United States where, they have an ability to actually thwart the process of the legislature. Up here, the legislature and the first minister and the executive, they're the same thing, especially even in this situation, where sadly enough the Greens have to play nice. And Mr. Weaver, I pity you, sir, for having to behave like you're behaving and not be able to say, look, this. Maybe you don't believe also. But I strongly believe that Horgan did this as a setup, because I heard it all the time from tradesmen. I heard it all the time that they didn't want a PR government because they knew it would mean a Green government. And that's really what Wilkinson was also saying, was he didn't want to respect the vote. If you wouldn't respect the vote if it went for PR, because it would mean a Green government. So this is like the attempts to screw around the CCF before, which was 51 and 56. What the Liberals and Tories did and what the W.E.C. Bennett did. It was an attempt to screw the CCF. It was an attempt to thwart the public will. Now, the public will in France, they found a voice by taking all their little yellow emergency jackets and wearing them in massing. And calling for, because they have a very different system than ours, but it's still FBTP, and Macron is kind of in there illegitimately because of political games in the presidential race, because it can be screwed around with their system, lots. Right, as well as the Congress of Deputies and the Senate, who are not doing anything, despite the calls for the referendum for this huge mass of the French public, despite the troubles in the streets yesterday in Toulouse. It was battles, but it wasn't really battles. It was cops pulling people and beating them more viciously than they'd had before. And this is all done for the French network so that they can have shots of riot footage about how dangerous the uprising is. But no, the referendum, the uprising is amazingly peaceful. Amazingly peaceful, and it's kind of like they go tous ensemble, hooray! I think it's tous ensemble, hooray, hooray, which means everyone together, right? Tous ensemble, hooray! And big hands up, like hands up, don't shoot. But in the U.S., the Occupy movement, they would be being shot at. If this was like Standing Rock, or this was in the U.S. or Canada, what would happen in Canada with this? If the natives did the same kind of mass mob action against, Mountie Squad, like it happened at Oka or Gustafsson, no, we'd have dead people. In the States, we'd have lots of dead people. Now, they're saying in France, maybe, it's so hard to know off our media, anything else I see. But the crisis is severe in France. Our media won't cover it, and it's a much more serious thing than the British Columbia farce of a referendum, and the young people here know that they've been screwed. That's my final point. That all the young people I've talked to that I tell about all this, they go, yeah, they agree, that they realize the future should belong to them. And who are all these old people who are going to die, who only care about their property values and their stock issues, and they don't care about their own grandkids, except if they're their own grandkids and they have some property for them to give them. Like, there's a really sick system here about, people living in the rain and people living in wealth, people living in absent wealth, making people live in the rain without knowing that that's what they're doing, but they are. So, we have this whole new questioning in the capitalist system. I'd like to see two men I'd like to really have come here and talk, Yanis Varoufakis, right? Varoufakis, the guy who was the Greek finance minister during the Syriza guy, and also, buddy with the pink hair from Cambridge Analytica. I mentioned the other guy, so I mentioned his name. Chris Wiley. Chris Wiley, I don't know if you'll ever see this, right? But man, you're from Victoria, buddy. You can come here. They'll try and bottle you and package you and control you just like they would on TV, and just like how it's done. But we need people like you. But I don't know. You see, the Green Party, they just don't have the political scope that I hope they had. Because they're all older, middle class, largely white. I have to say it, they are. And that's why they did so well in the three ridings that they did in Cowichan and Saanich North in the Islands, Oak Bay. That's why they did so well there. They're not doing well in the native ridings, even though they support native rights completely. And why is that? Well, because for the natives, even to vote for the Green Party is an endorsement of the same system that robbed them of all their lands and took their children and themselves from themselves and did awful things to them in the name of the crown. And the crown doesn't even have title here. This is a much bigger, serious geopolitical problem than people realize, because they are the actual title holders of the province. 85% of it anyway, less a few treaties like the ones I named. But, you know, we're out of the view of the world. We're out of the view of the rest of Canada. We're kept from being even understood here. The rest of Canada has no clue about anything that went on during the referendum or any of this post-referendum debate. What they're hearing is completely filtered, even by the Canadian progressive media, but especially by the conservative media monopolies, who are American-controlled. And if anybody thinks they're not, you got to remember who's been buying all the timber for the ass wipe and the toilet paper up here all these years, and who runs out of the ways of things getting out of here. You know, the Americans own the Canadian infrastructure. In BC, they own big chunks of what used to be the public government and public services. And what's this condition in the other provinces? Probably similar. I don't know. So, anyways, we're not an independent country. We should stop pretending that we are. And I've been saying for a while, a long time, I've said this. And it would only really be if the United States were a nicer country than it is right now, and more educated and not as insanely stupid, right? There's a lot of great Americans, but even they don't know enough about the world beyond their borders. You know, and they're friendly people. They can be wonderful people, but they can walk into a Walgreens and buy a gun, you know, and go out and shoot somebody. They go down to the theater and shoot somebody because they were having a bad day, or they remembered something that happened in Iraq, or something that happened when they were a kid, or somebody did something to them, or, oh, I want to just go take a few dozen out because it'll make for good TV. Yeah, America the beautiful, no longer. I don't like living next to you guys no more. It's right over there, right? Crazy world, right? I never thought I'd see this, but the world has never been as benign as you think it is when you're a kid. But as this times get longer, they're getting less and less and less benign, and more and more and more, not just dangerous, but malign. So anyways, what I see here is the politicians and the media who are part of the political process here. The media are basically a branch of the Liberal Party, or whoever happens to be the business party. And the Tyee and the Straight have been NDP clones for years, because the NDP with the other polarity. But they're papers of the polarity. There is no broad free press in British Columbia. And really, I don't know. I think there is in Seattle anymore either. You know, all that's gone. You know, there used to be things like that. We used to have the Vancouver Free University. I don't know what's happened to that. You know, maybe it's still out there. But, you know, it's not part of the culture of the city anymore, which is now commercial, technical, retail, fancy residential, fancy services, traffic, transit. Let's build more transit, you know. Let's build. But they're still doing it without title to the whole territory. And they're still doing it based on a legal system that has, its crown mandate is based on what exactly? You know, the whole system of having seats for areas spanning, you know, huge areas, without actually having the people in those areas in control of the person that they elect. Once you've elected that person, he's in that job. You can't go down to his office and pull him out. Well, under the French system or the Swiss system or the different systems that you can go pull them out. Enough of you. Now, it's different in Iceland. They just went and arrested the prime minister. Reykjavik only has 360,000 people, and it's only one island. Well, no, that's the island, and Reykjavik has half of them. They just went down to the prime minister's house and said, hey, you're under arrest. So different there. Different here, and different here. The prime minister has the army. The premier has, if he wishes, the Mounties. You know, and the last government had a tight relationship with the Mounties. Too tight. Way too tight. But do we have a media that's going to report on that? No. Does the international media know about it? No. Does the Guardian care about the gilets-jaunes and what they want? No. So why not? And is Al Jazeera not covering it because they think it's anti-Islamic? It's not. What's Die Zeit saying? RT, I already know, is trying to hype the violence. And so is the American progressive media, but it's not about the violence. The violence is Macron's. Violence isn't anybody else's. He's a little guy. He's got short man syndrome. I didn't realize how short he was. He's a short guy. He's got the Napoleon thing bad, and he doesn't have Napoleon's wits or charm. Anyways, nappy he's not, but he has ambitions of, I don't know what, but there's a different Macron. Macron is considered a dictator by his own people. And our media doesn't talk about that. Why? Because Macron's on the Security Council. He has nuclear weapons. His troops are supporting the U.S. weirdness in Syria. Well, really, is there anything to support in Syria anymore? I don't even know. I mean, the Arab Spring totally went off the rails in Syria, and it looks like the French Spring is going to go off the rails too, unless saner heads prevail. Because the violence yesterday in Toulouse and some of the other cities, it was bad. And in Paris, they had corralled people and bullied them up close and personal before they even started to protest. I saw some. People still protested, and they didn't bring out the tear gas and the grenades until after dark on a Saturday night on the Champs-Élysées. All right, and that's just Paris, though. Big violence was in the south, right? And it wasn't the extremists. It was Macron. It was Macron telling the guys to get tougher, because Macron doesn't want to resign. Macron doesn't want the banks torn apart. Macron doesn't want any of that, because he doesn't want his own ass up to the fucking guillotine. But they would use the guillotine or not. They haven't decided that they use the death penalty on him. But what they want is mass referendums all the time. They want a dynamic public democracy, that's citizen democracy, no farce of representative democracy. Representative democracy gives you a go-between who can be bought and sold and chided and threatened and easily sleazed. Right? This is the whole problem with representative democracy. You elect somebody and you can't do anything about them until the next election. No. Unless you have to appear weekly and they can be voted out or something like that. You have like a citizens assembly, a couple of times a year. And if you show up and people don't want you in the job anymore, somebody else has to send back to the Capitol. The immediate recall, it should be built into the system. And also recognition of boundaries, such that, like in Switzerland, the Basel-Land and Basel-Stadt are two different ridings. Bernisches Land is different from Bern Canton, the city canton. They wouldn't put the Chilcotin and Williams Lake and Quesnel in the same riding, in the same district. So Chilcotin would govern itself. It wouldn't have the people of Williams Lake deciding what was best for it and calling that their economic territory when they don't live there. So it's like Apo and the Apo model. The Apo model in Oaxaca is another one that should be looked at, where each commune, each village is a self-governing entity. There's better ways to do this, but how to bring this about without violence, I don't know. We're going to find out in France. Here it showed pacifism. Here we once had the resolve, and that resolve was broken in 1983 by fear of a U.S. invasion. Yes, it was in 1983. Those who were there remember. Those who remember those days know what I'm talking about. You can disbelieve me if I want. You can say, well, what citation do you want? Where's your footnote? Oh, believe me, it happened. Right? That's the whole point. Everybody wants footnotes on line sites now, like Buddy in Texas who wants to write BC's Chinese history, even though he's never been here. He's Chinese, so he figures he has more right than some old white guy. Yeah, that's what goes on in Wikipedia. And yeah, I am an old white guy, and it was easy to hound me and provoke me and bait me and do the games, but that's how it's done in Wikipedia. That's why there's so much bullshit in Wikipedia. That's why the Nova Albion article is called New Albion, because anything that any British Columbian has to say about it doesn't matter, because Americans own the site that they claim is the only true one. Now, it may be, but that doesn't give them the right to rewrite British history because America owns the site. Americans like everybody else. Canadians, too. Canadians don't reckon with this huge First Nations problem I've gone out about in my comments and my posts about the political geography of British Columbia, and how the rural areas, which are dominantly native, have their lands and resources and their children, or were taken from them based on the population of distant towns, saying, well, we have a legal right to do this, when they had no legal right at all because there was never a treaty here. So this is why the natives don't vote. I totally get it. Same in the Mackenzie Valley. They don't have treaties up there either. Yukon, there's no treaties. Nowhere outside of Rupert's Land. And what was Rupert's Land? It was some company in London who had supposed title to all the lands draining in Hudson Bay. Well, And what did it cost Ottawa to get them? Not $1 an acre. It wasn't even that. It's a cent an acre, or some ridiculous sum like that. But for who? Not the people who lived on it, and Canada sent in armed troops to suppress it. This is the whole dark history of Canada. Same as this referendum bullshit here. But we're all conditioned to say, oh, well, but we have nice, good government. No, we don't. We have government that's expedient government. It doesn't care about the young people. It doesn't care about, well, we want immigrants because we need the pension plans to keep stable, but we still don't want any power to change anywhere, and we still want to keep the old economy the way it's going. We don't want to change the economy for anything. We don't want to change the economy. We don't want the young people to think that even economic change is even possible. But you know what? Yeah, the banks are a Ponzi scheme in the long run. Someday, plug is going to get pulled on something called the U.S. dollar. And that'll pull the Canadian dollar, and it'll pull down a whole lot of the rest of the world economy. Who comes out on top? Well, we think we know, but even that's not sure, China. But we don't even know that's for sure. It's a crapshoot. The whole world's a crapshoot. And the reality of the world is we're facing bigger things, and facing bigger things than carbon emissions, my friend. Much bigger things than carbon emissions. So I'm going to be the unprofessor, no longer the angry professor. I'm going to try and smile on these videos and make friends, right? Because I want you to understand the things I'm saying and realize when I get angry, I'm angry because I feel righteous? No, justice. I want the truth known. And observations about what it actually means when somebody says something, what it actually means. Deconstructing the media, deconstructing the network, deconstructing what other people say, including their put downs of what I say. What they're really saying is what they're really saying about themselves. Such as it is. Perhaps that's the same about me. But I am only a looking glass as well as a crystal ball. And that crystal ball is only filled with facts. It's not filled with, well, yeah, there's some desires and fantasies in there, things that would be nice to see happen, and things that I wish they could have had happen, like, historical moments that could have gone the other way. Sure. But right now we're on the cusp. There's big things afoot in the world, and we're not being told about it, whether it was within Canada or between France and the rest of the world. And I know the Russians are totally in a different information sphere, as are the Chinese people. Now I'm going to make an effort to learn all the other languages now that I can in my remaining years, and see a lot of the places that I should be in and learning and being in and being part of as somebody. Not just as anybody traveling there as a tourist or somebody coming to live and retire and hang out. No, I want to be doing something. So hopefully this process I've begun as the young professor, and maybe I'll see about not so much finishing my degrees, but certainly approaching my music and my writing and vlogging much more professionally, including quality-wise. Same with music recording. And I was listening to my songs and I'm thinking, oh, I'm sounding same. I know that means I'm coming to a point where I'll be wanting to play new sounds of music, maybe a new instrument. But I get my wood whistle back. Supposedly my downstairs neighbor got it back. The young professor's kind of happy now, but he did want to make comments on this silly thing in North Carolina. And Andrew Wilkins is saying, well, we wouldn't want to accept the election, the same as the Republicans decommissioning Democrats from power before they can take it. Oh yeah, okay. So what was he going to do if PR had passed, Mr. Wilkinson? So what you wanted passed, so all of a sudden you're not saying nothing? Really, huh? And I wonder how many young kids are working on 12-hour days that weren't able to even think about voting, and you don't care if they voted or not. And they're the ones that should be voting, not you, not your friends, not the NDP union boys up on Site C who are wanting jobs on the pipeline. As if they're all going to get them. All the guys who voted against for FPTP because thinking that the pipeline would pass were thinking it would mean bite jobs for them. No, there's not that many jobs on the pipeline, boys. There's not even that many spin-off jobs in service industries. Doesn't matter. It's not going to get built. Why? Well, there's about 10 reasons why not, but that's another story. Anyways, other than the obvious one of native resistance, but financial issues. Anyways, and America versus China. And why do we need it now if China's being the way it's being? Or do we really want to keep on kissing ass? Well, I guess we have to. We, quote, unquote, have to, in order to try and keep that stupid free trade deal that the Prime Minister wants to get with China. Why? They already have people. Why would they bother even consenting to a free trade deal? They're just gaming him. just gaming him. It's so funny. The young professor is signing off on his porch on the 30th of December. I'm still wondering where he's going to be living in a month. I still have no idea, and I haven't even really know how to begin to look. Good night.